Welcome to Go Open, the world's only program dedicated entirely to open source and the movement thereon. How far does the movement go? Well, Mars, actually, which is a fair distance off. Remember Rover, that little thing named after a dog that went all the way to Mars to scribble around and find a fossil that no one can work out what it is. Well, it wouldn't have been able to do that. It's a long way to go for a bone, basically. It wouldn't have been able to do that without open source. So that's amazing. Also, if you keep listening and pay attention to what you hear, answer our questions and win some fantastic prizes.
Open source software exists as a result of the combined efforts of millions of computer programmers, users, and software vendors from around the world. They share their intellectual property freely, and they believe that software should cost nothing and should enrich the lives of users. Open source software is the alternative and biggest challenger to closed source or proprietary software. It generally costs the user nothing. It can be distributed freely to anyone. Download it, use it, modify it, and give it away. It's a whole new world. Open source is the future of computing.
Space is a very interesting concept. In fact, it's quite important to me. I really need space, but not that much. Right, our next insert is quite interesting because there are two Norrises that we all know, or should. Chuck Norris is one, but Jeff Norris is another one. He works for NASA.
It's the final frontier, or so they say. But it's more than just idle curiosity that keeps men reaching for the stars. The International Space Station has yielded fantastic results in most of the sciences. And now Mars is starting to reveal great secrets about the creation of the planets and how our very own planet came to be. To this end, America's National Aeronautics and Space Administration spent billions of dollars to send 2 robotic probes on a 7-month journey to Mars. The trajectory was so precise that they were able to direct the probes to 2 specific sites on the red planet that may have had water in the distant past.
We've discovered that water has existed in a salty sea form at the Opportunity rover's landing site. A remarkable discovery, one that we simply didn't know that about Mars before we went there.
Jeff Norris is the Chief Software Architect and Development Team Lead for the Science Activity Planner for the 2003 Mars Exploration Rover mission. Part of his duties include working on the team that determines what each rover does each Martian day.
We don't operate these rovers like you would a remote control car because of the significant amount of time that it takes for us to transmit a signal from Earth to Mars. Rather than telling it, okay, drive forward and tell us what you see, we tell it a whole day of things to accomplish. And then during the day on Mars, it accomplishes those tasks primarily autonomously, meaning that we're not in contact with it at all. And then at the end of the day, it sends back the results of that day's work. So it was certainly something that made our software something challenging to write.
It's a long way to go, and at great expense, so everything had to have the very best chance at survival. This was the first time in the history of NASA that the administrators decided that open source software was mature enough to be used in such a mission-critical way.
So early on in the development of our software, instead of asking the question for every requirement, how can we develop this, we asked the question, is there any way we can avoid developing this? So that led us to consider open source software in a number of cases.
Although open source software is not used on the rovers themselves, it plays a major part in many aspects of the mission.
The place where open source software was used to great success on this mission was in the ground operations software. So these are the tools that we use on Earth to analyze what the rover is telling us and to tell it what to do next.
During the testing and design phase, the NASA team found that the open source community was surprisingly responsive, especially when compared with the support from developers of commercial software that was also in the project.
One of the greatest motivators for open source software developers is seeing their work used in an interesting way. They were extremely responsive to our needs. In many cases, we would discover a problem with the software, and they would send us a correction for the problem within hours.
Although NASA is a multi-billion-dollar operation, it still has to keep an eye on the budget, and Jeff admits that this was part of the motivation. But there were other factors.
It allowed us to conserve our resources for the problems that we knew we had to accomplish. And when we were early in the process and didn't know exactly how the program was going to shape up, and we knew that part of the program could be covered by an open source software package, we could sort of not worry about that part of the program for a while. And if, and as things often do, things change during the development of the project, if we suddenly had to retreat from that area and not work on that after all, if we didn't need that after all, we hadn't invested our resources in developing it. So there's a benefit both in cost reduction to our project, as well as, I believe, in increased agility in the development process.
The rovers have now passed their first birthdays and are still sending back valuable data from Mars, far in excess of the project's expectations. They have traveled a combined distance of over 6 kilometers and sent back thousands of pictures and rock analyses.
My team is also helping NASA to reach out to the public with our software. We've released a binary version at this point of our software to the general public. So we're also asking, what can we do in the future to make our software more exciting for the general public? Because we believe that we can serve both missions. We can enable the success of future missions on Mars while also allowing people in the general public to participate and learn about the mission with us.
From Red Planets to Red Hat. Red Hat's main product is a version of the Linux operating system which sells for very little, and you can also download it for free. How do you make money out of that? Well, to tell us, let's speak to one of the co-founders of Red Hat. Here's Bob Young.
Well, let's start up. I believe you were a middleweight boxer, but you're considered to be a heavyweight contender in the world of open source. Tell us how you got into that to begin with all those years ago.
I was trying to rent Sun Microsystems and Apollo Computer Unix workstations. And the engineers who I was talking to about these things were asking me about open source software. And I listened to their story. You know, I'd ask them where this stuff comes from, and they'd all tell me, well, it's from engineers according to their skill, to engineers according to their need. But anyway, shortly after I first was introduced, I found myself unemployed. I was launching a little software distribution system, and I started adding these what are now open source products to my catalog. They became my best sellers, and I very quickly learned that there was actually a business in giving away software for free. And what you learn very quickly as a salesman is you'll only be successful if you're actually delivering real value, something your customers really need, in a way that your competitors simply aren't solving that need. And what you saw very early on in the open source free software movement is we could do something for our customers that Oracle and IBM and Apple Computer and Microsoft simply were not prepared to do, which was delivering control to the customer.
What do you think currently is the biggest problem with open source?
I don't think there is one, to be honest. Any technology model takes many years, literally decades, to become the dominant model. So, you know, open source really only started getting some traction in the mid-90s. We're now only 9 years later, and we're beginning to see the consideration of open source for every application. Another 10 years from now, people will forget that in the early 90s, you couldn't get source code for the technology that you were building your organization around. You were completely dependent on the vendor, and people are going to shake their heads and wonder who allowed that model to exist.
Since you were the entrepreneur with Red Hat, how did you get the name and the marketability out there to the world? Because everyone internationally, if they've heard of Linux, they've heard of Red Hat.
Red Hat's brand from the very earliest day is that every line of code we distribute under an open source license. We treat you as a partner in the development of this technology.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us here at GoPen. It was really interesting chatting to you.
Thanks, Mark, and good luck with the Go Open project. It sounds fascinating.
Thanks, Bob. I'm not into commercial TV. I don't get on TV. I get in TVs. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Okay, so after the break we go stargazing at the heart of Beershoek Radio Astronomy Observatory. How's that for a long name? Ooh. How does Mother Nature practice safe and responsible family planning? Earth control, that's correct. How does it happen? Well, it's quite simple. There is an enormous